What I mean by strength relationships is that there's a power that we have inside of ourselves that we're not always so aware of, and that is that we call it Tselem Elokim. Tselem Elokim is that part of Hashem that lives inside of us. And it's so powerful because it's connected to Hashem. And if we can only access it, we can discover that we have wisdom that we didn't realize that we have. In fact, our rabbis tell us this in Pirkei Avot, where they say, one of the great sages says, Gedalti min hachachamim, I grew up amongst the sages, v'lo matzati davar tov el shtika. The greatest thing I discovered was the power of silence. It's interesting, one would think when you grow up amongst the sages, you would hear wisdom, you would hear ideas, you would hear Torah. He says, no, I discovered how powerful it could be when you remain silent. So silence really is an art. And what does it allow? It allows for us to hear that voice that exists inside of ourselves, a voice that's connected to Hashem. Now, that voice is a voice that contains an enormous amount of wisdom. In fact, the Vilna Gaon tells us that even though we've lost Nevuah from the world, we lost prophecy, that there's a vestige of prophecy that lives in something called intuition. How do we access intuition? Well, I can't access my intuition if there's noise. And we don't always mean external noise. We're talking about the noise that's inside of our minds. And sometimes our own speech interferes with that. So what we need to do in order to access that is we have to just sometimes let ourselves be and stop and remain silent. And we can access intuition that can help us solve the most important issues that we face. In fact, I tell this to people all the time when they ask me questions. I say, well, what does your intuition say? And allow yourself time to stop and think about it. That's the way we have to access intuition in order to hear the voice, in order to know what to do. But how about that in relationships themselves? In relationships themselves, oftentimes someone says something to us, and our response can be a response to what they say and may be hurtful. Probably the most valuable thing we can do in order to learn to respond correctly is not to say anything. To hold back, and not just to hold back because we don't want to hurt, but by holding back, what happens is, all of a sudden the words emerge inside of ourselves, which are the correct words to say. I suggest this to people too, who are in shidduchim, going out on dates. Sometimes girls will tell me, or boys will tell me the conversation doesn't flow. So what I say to them is listen and remain silent. If you listen and remain silent, all of a sudden you'll hear your soul speak to you. And when your soul speaks to you, the words will come out and you'll know what to say. And all of a sudden the conversation, which appears so dull and so dead and so boring, all of a sudden comes alive. Because you're not just responding with your mind, you're not just responding superficially, you're responding from the depth of who you are. So silence, when cultivated properly, is a magnificent gift. We have to know how to utilize it. The Yerushalmis understood this. They tell a famous story about one or two great rabbis that were looking for shidduchim for their children. It says they sat together for 20 minutes without saying anything. At the end of those 20 minutes, finally one of the rabbis looked up at the other and says, no. The other person says, okay. And one of the sons commented and said, you have to understand something. Don't think they weren't speaking. They were speaking. They were speaking tremendously. They were speaking through the art and the silence of silence. To quote Simon and Garfunkel, hello, darkness, my old friend. I come to welcome you again. Maybe we too can cultivate that beautiful, wonderful art, the sound of silence.
Wow. Shekaya.